Good morning.
Good morning.
I think this presentation will be a little bit of a bridge between what we've been hearing this morning and what we're going to hear after the break as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about scale, about the different trajectories of different types of social enterprise, because we often lump them all together and they're incredibly different animals. And to also look at the social enterprising of business. Maybe I wanted to start with what one said about Vietnam when you were doing your presentation on Vietnam. You said, market or not market, profit or not profit, it doesn't matter. What matters is the impact for target groups. And so I guess coming from Oxfam, that's where I'm coming from, absolutely, is about the impact. And when I talk about impact, I often think about 3 dimensions of impact. There's how many people are affected and how many lives are changed. So there's the breadth. There's also the depth. How deep is that change in people's lives? And there's the duration, the length. How long does that change continue to happen for? So in terms of breadth, I think about just simple numbers. There are 98 million people in the Philippines. 100 million, okay. And so when we talk about social enterprises, what are the social enterprises which are really able to move the needle in terms of just the numbers of people? I remember when I was working with Oxfam on our work in Palestine, on olive oil. And we'd been spending a lot of years trying to get fairly traded, organic olive oil to specialist stores in the UK and Europe. But the volume was tiny. So the number of farmers benefiting was tiny. And we always would write these reports about how fantastic this was. But it really wasn't having the scale of impact in terms of the number of people. And we pivoted and started to work with olive farmers, not around this very niche market in Europe, but looking to the Gulf at just high quality olive oil for a much larger market. And that was really important, that change. So impact in terms of scale. And when we think of different types of organisations will have different routes to scale. And may be able to reach hundreds of thousands of people. I think of Dr. Kim's example of DLAM, which has an opportunity to reach millions of people, millions of households, in more than one country as well. And I wonder what opportunities there are for scaling, and there needs to be a yearning for scale. ICT-enabled mega co-ops, I don't know, is that possible? What's next after microfinance? Is there something else coming which will reach millions of people? Then in terms of duration, it's those business models that are not dependent on fickle donor funding, so that the change keeps on happening, that the benefits keep on accruing. But when we think of business models, one of my favourite business models is Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, they're not going to be listed on the IIX exchange, but it's an incredibly scalable business model. I don't know how many countries Alcoholics Anonymous is present in, but it has a model that enables it to sustain itself and grow. So for me, that's really powerful. So when I think about business models, I don't just think about business, I think about just sustainability and how long the change can keep giving. In terms of depth, I think that's maybe where the word transformation comes in. So I don't know if it's the same for some of you, but for me, change is usually around changing power relations at some level or other, and often at many levels, from the family level, community level, through up to the national level and even the global level. And in that, with power comes friction. And sometimes within the social enterprise discourse, it seems like everyone's happy and everyone loves each other. But actually there's power in there. There's power sometimes within gender relations. There's power within those who have capital and those who don't. If we go back to some Marxist thinking from yesterday. So when we're dealing with change, we have to be aware that there are power issues and that some people may not like the moving forward of a social enterprise agenda if it challenges those power dynamics. And when we talk about change, there's a need, if one's going to be accessing certain types of capital, to be able to, or certain types of funding, to be able to measure what the change is. But change is a subtle thing as well. And we may say this is fantastic, there's been an increase in women's income. Brilliant. And they're also working, women are now working 4 extra hours a day. So they're now working 17 hours a day, not 13 hours a day. So do we pat ourselves on the back? Is everyone happy? We don't know. But we've got to be thinking of these things. It may be that production increases for a certain time, but common property resources decrease. So that actually there's less, the places where people used to gather firewood is no longer available. Or the soil quality is eroding rapidly, or the quality of water is decreasing because of the increase in productivity somewhere else. So it's those subtleties which we also need to be aware of, and sometimes, depending on the type of investor, that may be outside of the scope, but we need to keep it in our scope. So different types of social enterprise. I keep on having this idea of a zoo of social enterprises, and we put so many things within this category of social enterprise, and I think in some ways it's useful. Within Korea, there's a narrowing of saying, okay, this is what we're defining as social enterprises here. And also sometimes I'm trying to go through all the smoke around this new discourse, for me it's quite new anyway, around social enterprise, and saying, what's new here and what's old? So sometimes I get through all this smoke and I think, oh, it's actually a cooperative here. Okay, I know what those are. And I was just being a little bit dazzled by this word social enterprise. So I read in the UK, social enterprises contribute £24 billion to economic activity. What's that, $34 billion? That's a lot. And I thought, well, what's under this? Let's get through the smoke. And having got through the smoke, this is what my interpretation is, that a lot of that is on large housing associations. It's also charities and social enterprises that are doing major government service provision. So elderly service provision, disability care services, palliative care services. So that takes up a huge amount of that $34 billion. And that includes the construction of new housing and so forth. A lot of the case studies that I come across are not those. They're not the 24 billion. They're the 500 million over here, who are just trying new things. And so it's really, for me, it's really useful to think about the different types of animal in this zoo. Interesting, in the UK, the things which have driven the increase in size of the social enterprise space is government outsourcing has been a huge part of that. Idealistic entrepreneurs has been an important part, and ethical consumers, and that's something which we'll come back to as well. And if we think about scaling, different animals in the zoo have got different trajectories. So a service subsidizing social enterprise, like a hospital which has a premium and a basic service, that can scale in a very different way to a cooperative. And therefore it can access very different types of funding. Likewise, those social enterprises that provide organisational support, in other words, that cross-subsidise. So in Oxfam, we have Oxfam shops. It hadn't crossed my mind for a long time. It took me a long time to realise that that's a social enterprise. But I don't think we're going to list it on the stock exchange. But I might be wrong. So it's really worth thinking, what different type of social enterprise are we dealing with? And some will be able to access certain types of funding, grant funding, venture philanthropy, crowdsourcing, money from remittances potentially, but with such different beasts that we're putting inside the zoo. And thinking about different routes to scale. The opportunity for a co-op to increase its productivity or its volume by 30%, 20% is very different to the example that we had earlier from Alison about Spring Health, which is reaching 38,000 households now, but will be reaching 350,000, we hope, in 2 years. So some graphs go like that for a while, some go like that. And so they'll attract different sorts of interest in investment. And there's some of these are disruptive. Some social enterprises bring in sort of disruptive change. They change the whole way the market works, just like microfinance did when it first came in. And M-Farm, which is a web-based commodity exchange for 5 million farmers in Kenya. That's a really disruptive type of social enterprise. Whereas improving packaging for a certain type of fair trade produce is much more of an incremental change. I wanted to highlight the different opportunities within the zoo of creating joint value, and I think that Simon's example is such a good example of the creation of joint value, and I think that's where a huge amount of possibility and potential is. And actually, the work which Kenema is doing, linked with Mars, is a way of engaging that actually a government isn't able to do, and is a way that a charity or an Oxfam or local organisations can play a role in facilitating that, supporting that. But it's critical to have these sorts of players bringing change, and bringing a change which is at scale. And I think, I love the word scale. I keep on coming back to it. Just a word on investment. I think that there will be some social enterprises which will never be investment ready. They're not that sort of animal. They'll always be in a position where they'll need very soft loans or grants in order to create value. And that may not be a bad thing. It's just, that's the type of animal it is. And unless it completely changes and becomes a different animal, certain doors will be open and certain doors will be closed. We've mentioned the ecosystem quite a bit in the last day or so, and I just wanted to emphasise the importance of developing the ecosystem. But just to add the twist, that there's different types of ecosystem, actually. Different things are necessary to enable different animals in the zoo. So the sort of support which is required for co-ops to thrive may be very different to the environment that allows millennials to start up new social enterprises, or for companies to transition into becoming social enterprises. Very different. So when we think about let's develop an ecosystem, let's have a little bit more subtlety about what sort of social enterprises are we talking about, and when we have a vision of okay, what would it look like in 5 years' time? To think it through for each of those different types. I then wanted to, the last area I wanted to touch on was the social enterprising of business. I think, well, what's the opposite of fair trade? And what's the opposite of a living wage? And what's the opposite of a social enterprise? Is it an unsocial enterprise? Is it a wage on which you can't really live and bring up your family? Is it unfair trade? And are we satisfied that such things exist? And what can we do within, for those of us engaged with social enterprises, to change how regular business is and to socialise it, so that the rules are changed in favour of fairness? So should private hospitals have an obligation to provide services to those who are poor? A proportion of services? I don't know. But laws can be changed in order for that to happen if it's felt to be important. So that that hospital, private hospital, behaves like a social enterprise. So do we have a role to bring others over the line? More animals in. Let's bring some elephants into the zoo. And Alison talked about mining companies, and some have integrated effective land use into their way of doing business, and others still keep CSR as a separate part of their business. And I think it's very much about integration. Oxfam's running a campaign, a global campaign called Behind the Brands, where we're really wanting to encourage large food and beverage companies to think in a much more social way and act in a much more social way, because we feel that if they can change, that can have huge impact, and it is having a huge impact on people's lives. So, in fact, we talked about Mars. So I've just opened up the website, and so what we've done is we've developed a scorecard for the 10 major food and beverage companies, and that's there in the public domain, and you can visit it on the website if you look up Behind the Brands. And it rates these different companies against certain criteria around use of water, engagement of small-scale farmers, engagement of women. And so I think that the collaboration with Kenema reflects an intention by Mars to take these things seriously, and so to act in a more of a socially enterprising way. So I'll just read what it says here about Mars. Mars scores poorly in terms of protecting land rights and on water. In fact, it's the last in each of all the 10 companies. But it fares much better when it comes to recognising issues faced by small-scale farmers, workers, and committed to supporting women in supply chains. And it's great actually to have a really strong example of that working with small-scale farmers here. And I think it's a fantastic example of joint value creation. So, in summary, scale, zoo, and elephants. Thank you.